Welcome to Crafting Without Permission. I'm your host, Griff Grayman. Thanks for joining me here in the bowels of the earth beneath Rusalka Ranch. That's right, folks, we are 100 feet down, underground, in my studio compound past the edge of town. And I'm going to share with you two very simple projects for people of any skill level that are going to form the backbone and the bedrock of some deliciously evocative scenery for your future tabletop games. Today we're going to be making some durable and beautifully textured gridless playmats, as well as a set of modular canyon walls, the combination of which you will find innumerable uses for, I'm sure. So, without further ado, let's craft.
Okay, we want to begin here by taking a piece of black felt fabric that's appropriate for your tabletop, and in this case I cut the corners to give it a more organic feel, and we're going to use this as a base to which we are going to adhere our aggregate using this Flex Seal Clear. Make sure it's the clear sealant, and we're going to lay down a layer and then use that as an adhesive to then add our aggregate. I'm using a fine play sand in this case. Make sure it's really nice and dry, whatever you're using. And we want to do sort of a sandwich that is our felt, then a layer of this Flex Seal, then sand, and then we're going to shake out any excess sand that didn't get good adhesion and then follow up with another few layers of Flex Seal. And you want to make sure that you get a good but thin layer of coverage across this mat, and make sure you really reinforce the edges so that they are well sealed in and are not going to, that'll be where you're most likely to have the aggregate come off in the future. And once you do a couple of layers on top of this, you're going to have a really wonderful texture. I've kind of crinkled my mat up prior to this to add to that sort of dune-like or, irregular texture. And once you get a few layers on, let it dry completely. You can keep it as is. It will be kind of wet looking, so what I chose to do is add some paint and some highlight later on with some dry brush. But it's really as simple as that, and if you did it right and you make sure you shake off any excess, you're going to have a really durable mat that you can use for years to come that's got a beautiful texture that complements other terrain on your tabletop. Starting with a nice thick piece of XPS foam, I'm going to draw some long, generally linear but irregular shapes that are going to make good pieces that are interlocking canyon pieces. We're shooting for them all to be generally the same width so that they'll stack nicely, and in order to texturize them, I'm using a utility knife here. I'm making a lot of horizontal cuts that I then break away as opposed to slicing away. This is going to bring out the textures inside the foam that are going to look more like rock as opposed to just a straight man-made surface. And I follow up and try to imagine the wind and the rain and the rivers that rushed through here and sort of wore the initial broken, chipped pieces down. And for the remaining flat surfaces, I'm going to use some balled up tin foil to impart a rough, uneven texture on those surfaces. If you have a Proxxon cutter, you can use that to speed up the process. Again, I'm shooting for shapes that are somewhere between 4 and 6 inches long. You can always use those to make longer shapes, but it doesn't limit you to having these long, straight pieces. And really you want to try to get in a mode where you're cutting all the pieces with a similar style so that they all blend together nicely. On the tops and bottoms, I'm going to go for a more pitted texture by using a layer of wood glue followed by just some regular play sand. Make sure it's dry. And this will add a lot of pitted texture to the surfaces. I follow up with a layer of Uncle Jeremy's Black Magic Sauce. That's Mod Podge and black acrylic paint mixed together. It's going to seal in that aggregate layer, and it's also going to protect the pieces from breaking. I'm going to go with a real simple color scheme here, some nutmeg brown, some bright red, and some bright orange, going for sort of a southwestern desert, sort of Grand Canyon thing. And don't be afraid to use really bold colors at this stage. If you use too muted colors, by the time you wash it, etc., it's just going to look monochrome, and it's not what we're going for. I'm using a really wet dry brush here with a lot of paint on the brush, but the goal is to only hit the lighter areas so that we retain a lot of that dark primer coat underneath to enhance our shadows and really reveal all the texture. I'll follow that up after I've done my underlayer with some highlight textures. For my next highlight coat, I'm just going to use sort of a beige tan color, and as we add highlights, we're going to get progressively drier with our brush so that we don't lose that nice intense color that we've got underneath. When you're doing highlights, you need to think about the fact that you are trying to reproduce light, and so as you go, the goal is to put less and less paint down on more so the raised surfaces. And for a final highlight coat, I'm going to use just some pure whites. Again, I'm going to be really careful here. I'm not trying to broadcast this on the entire surface, more so just on the rim and the most raised areas. Following up our sand texture, we're going to add some larger aggregate. A little bit of wood glue where we think that rock chips and breakages might have collected. We're going to achieve this texture by using a little bit of kitty litter. This has to be the plain, unscented, no chemical added kind of kitty litter. And we'll go ahead and goop that on, and then in areas where we can still see wood glue, we're going to follow with a little bit of our fine sand to blend that in and avoid weird oozy lumps on our pieces. So here I'm doing an improvised brown wash recipe, starting with a base of isopropyl alcohol and then adding a few other neutral mediums and binders, in this case some Pledge floor protective polish. I'm also going to add some matte medium and some brown ink for color. This recipe turned out really well, but it did end up clogging up my spray nozzle, so these kind of things happen. You gotta experiment, you gotta get out there and not be too afraid to ruin some pieces. Like I said, this one worked out fine, but it's not necessarily a recipe that I would reproduce in the future, because it just really gunked the heck out of my spray bottle. But the purpose of this is going to be another layer of sealant that is going to dry and help harden on some of that larger aggregate, that kitty litter that we put on there, and it's going to soak into that and blend all of our colors together so that everything looks nice and uniform and bring out the lower shadow details a little more. If we got too much, we can dab it off a little bit. And of course, our trusty heat gun speeds things along. So now we've achieved some really nice color and some really nice texture. I'm going to add one more layer of sort of bright red striation to represent sort of a sediment layer in the process. And I'm going to follow up with some little grass tufts for detail. These are just pre-made static tufts. They do have adhesive, but I like to add hot glue to make sure they really stay on nicely. And that's really all you need to have a really nice set of matching canyon wall pieces that stack well and are very durable. Cha-cha, et voilà! Que magnifique!